Wasn't easy, was it, Sooner fans? Not at all. Golden Hat Trophy for the Red River Rivalry goes to the Sooners, 31-26. And part of you might be feeling and thinking, how in the heck did the Sooners pull that off? Because you look at the stat sheet, especially that first half, and it's amazing that Texas not only wasn't winning this game entering halftime, but it's amazing that they weren't just blowing Oklahoma out. We'll go over the total stats in just a little bit, but first, at halftime, Texas had over 270 yards of total offense. OU, 29. 29 yards of total offense for a team that averages 42 points a game. Yeah. Sooners, 29 yards. I mean, come on. I know Texas's defense, I said it on the weekly matchup show, is good. Are they so good to where the Sooners, with only 15 plays in that first half, can only average just under 2 yards a play? And again, hey, you take victory, okay? If you're a Sooner fan, yeah, winning beats losing. I'll say that all the time, anytime the Sooners get a win, even if they don't deserve it. And today, I really, a good part of me doesn't feel like they did. The one thing I will say, and Texas fans won't want to hear it, and even my 9-year-old could tell you this: what's the goal in any sport? Outscore your opponent. Outscore your opponent. No matter what. And the Sooners did that. Big plays in the first half. The Alex Ross kickoff return. The Zach Sanchez 41-yard interception return for a touchdown. They turned out to be invaluable today. They did. Because, like I said, Texas, in my opinion, I thought they played hard enough and for the second straight year out-physical, out-man the Sooners. But it's all about that scoreboard. And Sooners lose today, and the national championship playoff thing, well, it's past tense. It's forget it, over with, done, finito, history. You're playing the last 6 games of the season for pride. You're playing that second half of the season for a decent bowl bid at 4-2. But you're 5-1, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens the rest of the season. And the good news for the Sooners, your 3 toughest games of the year, in no particular order, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, and Baylor, are all at home. And Bob Stoops, in his long career at Oklahoma, has only lost to Norman 5 times. So you got to love those odds. But again, this was a game where, after watching it, my byline says it all. A win, but the Sooners have a lot of work to do. A lot of work's needed. And it's surprising to me, not just because the Longhorns defensively really had the Sooners figured out in quarters 1 and 2, and really throughout much of the game, other than maybe 3 drives. But Texas's front 4 was doing the job against the Sooners' offensive line, at times driving them back. I mean, it's no wonder Ross, again, was single digits in rushing yards, and it's no wonder Pirine did not average even 4 yards a carry. Now, in the second half, he was a workhorse for them, getting the job done when needed upon. But it was tough sledding. I mean, Texas, for the second straight year, was the more physical team. And if you look on the flip side, the Texas offensive line, what can you say about those guys? I mean, there wasn't one single offensive lineman for the Longhorns who had double-digit career starts. And yet, they really, I'd probably give them the edge. In fact, there's no doubt you give them the edge over OU's defensive front that has veterans on it. They had the better day. Texas will be thinking about the penalties, which were devastating, especially first quarter with 5 of them. False starts. They just couldn't stay still. A delayed game penalty. Of course, the big penalty, that massive Swoopes run, I think it was over 70 yards, and it gets called back on a holding penalty. Wiped out for the most part. Who knows what might have happened in the game after that, if that hold doesn't happen. 11 penalties on the day for the Longhorns for 85 yards. The Sooners were the more disciplined team. No turnovers, 3 penalties for only 20 yards, and just one turnover for the Longhorns, but it was a big one. Zach Sanchez, Johnny on the spot, ran it back for a touchdown. That play and the Alex Ross kickoff return were the only things preventing that first half from potentially getting ugly, even on the scoreboard. When it was halftime, most of those cheers were from the Texas fans, and yet OU was winning 17-13 because it really didn't feel at that point like the Sooners were winning. Thankfully, in the second half, they did some things to loosen up this, Texas defense a little bit. That first play by Shepard on the end around, that 31-yard run, that was more yardage on that particular play than OU had the entire first half. That's pretty pathetic, huh? But there were a couple of nice drives, and Trevor Knight, he's still misfiring receivers. The coaches still are not allowing him to run the ball as much as they should. There was a designed run, I think, to start the fourth quarter, but that was pretty much it. And he did find Blake Bell a couple of times on passing plays, and they've got to do that more often because Blake Bell was open today. OU doesn't use the tight end near enough. Not since they had James Hanna there have they used the tight end enough. And if you want to get picky, go back to the late 2000s. And I know they don't have anybody of this talent now, but Jermaine Gresham. You don't think he wasn't valuable in 08? Oh, yeah. You don't have to throw to the tight end all the time or make him the most important weapon, but man, oh man, Bell's open. Use him. And again, we're not seeing somebody other than Shepard step up. And in fact, in the first half, we didn't even see Shepard do anything. He did get a third quarter touchdown, but he had just 4 catches. The Texas defense, I commend them for the job they did. Now for the total stats. The Longhorns in this game, 482 yards, more than a 2-to-1 ratio over the Sooners at 232. And you look at number of catches Texas had today, 27. OU only had 12 catches, including none by KJ Young. Deron Neal only had 2 catches. So again, we're talking about that receiver input by somebody other than Shepard, and today there wasn't much. But toward the end of the game, when it was 31-26, the Sooners were able to melt most of that clock. Of the last, I think, 4 or 5 minutes, they melted all but about 25 seconds of it. A couple of first downs, including a third down conversion, the only one they had the entire day. And you had to really feel for the punter for the Sooners, I believe Jeb Barnett. He had to punt 9 times today. 9. Whew. And for Texas, it wasn't a whole lot better. They had 8 punts. Again, the Sooners know that defensively, there's still problems. Not getting pressure on the quarterback, except if you put Stryker in. He's your outside linebacker. But the defensive front again wasn't one of their finest hours. Rush defense wasn't always there. And offensively, Texas had them figured out. But there was a couple of drives that the Sooners finally got touchdowns in that second half. And then when they needed to melt most of that clock away, they were able to do that. And by the time Texas got it back, it was too late for the Longhorns. They had mismanaged their timeouts. And the Longhorns, I think, are a team that, Charlie Strong is instilling in them, toughness, especially on the defensive side. We saw that. But they still don't have that discipline. And if you just looked at the stat sheet, Texas really should have won this game. But it's not all about that. You got to capitalize. You got to finish drives. And they had 2 drives that were inside the 10, and they had to come away with field goals. So you credit OU for that. So sometimes the game of football, if you don't finish what you started, it'll come back to bite you. And I think in Texas' case it did. But the Longhorns, I think, have a lot of good things to look forward to. And for the Sooners, they know that they got out of Dallas by the skin of their teeth, and they have to play a lot better on both sides of the ball. I thought special teams today was really a benefit for the Sooners. Quickly going over my 4 keys of the game that we did talk about on the weekly matchup show. Trevor Knight, be consistent. Talked about this earlier. I'm going to give him a C. In the first half, again, this was just bad. And it wasn't all on him. I realized that Texas had a lot to do with it. Not much you can do with only 15 offensive plays in one half. The second half, did a little bit better, but Knight's biggest thing, again, just like the game against West Virginia early, and just like TCU throughout, the guy's got to be more relaxed. He's got to calm down. Sometimes your emotions, sometimes if you are not completely focused, bad things are going to happen. The ball's going to sail. And sometimes his engine gets a little too revved up, and you can ill afford that for your signal caller to do that. He's got to be more consistent. Now, he did throw 60%, but again, he didn't have too many attempts. Stayed away from the turnovers, but had guys open again and still misfiring. At one time, he overthrew somebody by about 10 feet, or 10 yards, I should say. It was that type of a day for Knight when it came to throwing. They got the win, but again, it's got to be a little more consistent. And again, it's got to be getting Young and Neal more opportunities. And Neal at the same time got to hold on to the ball. And same thing for Young. Number 2, early start could hold true. This is a D for the Sooners. Texas is a slow starting team, but today they dominated the time of possession early on in particular, and of course rushing and passing, and the defense made sure that OU went nowhere. Thankfully, the 2 big plays kept OU ahead on the scoreboard. But Texas is just a team that doesn't get things going offensively. In the first half, they did in this case. And it's one of the biggest reasons, why the Sooners were in a dogfight today. Number 3, limit big plays. I'm going to go C+ because Texas really nickeled and dimed the Sooners big time. They were able to get those short passes, the intermediate game going, and with Texas' speed, the Longhorns were able to turn some short gains into plays that did a little bit more. But not too many big plays. They did have the big pass play on the first possession to Shipley, but they couldn't turn that into a touchdown. Texas, they didn't defensively. They weren't able to come up with turnovers. So, again, you put that one in the OU column. Against special teams, that's where OU really benefited from. So, Texas didn't get a push from that. So, the Sooners, as far as limit big plays, they did good in that area. Probably saved their bacon today. It was Texas, 5-10 yarding in so much, running and passing like they did last year. So I can't just go B or A in this situation. But limiting big plays, I thought the Sooners for the most part did that. And then finally, the team who rushes better in this rivalry wins the game. Incomplete, one of the rare times where that was not the case. In fact, in the first half, the Sooners with under 30 total yards couldn't do anything right. They ended up with 103 rushing yards. They ended up with 232 total for the game. Texas, by the way, 148 rushing yards. So 148, 103. Texas won the rushing department. But in this case, the Sooners win in spite of being outrushed by 45 yards. The big plays again favored the Sooners, not the Longhorns. Special teams favored the Sooners, not the Longhorns. And so the Sooners, despite being outrushed, were able to find other ways to win. But in the rivalry, that typically hadn't been this scenario. So for the Sooners, you got Kansas State, another top 20 team to face, and they're going to have a good defense as well. Expect to see Waters in that zone read, but at least you get Kansas State in your backyard. It'll be OU's first home game, if you can believe it, in 5 weeks, not since they played Tennessee back in early September. And for Charlie Strong in Texas, they're 2-4. But did that look like a losing team to you, a team that has more losses than wins? Not to me either. They'll play hard, and they didn't quit today. And I think if you're a Texas fan, yeah, you lost the game, and losing to a rival always sucks. But your team played with a lot of pride, and in my opinion, should have won the game. But if you're a Sooner fan, you never reject a victory. You find other ways to win when you're not able to do the things you should be able to do. Find ways to score in other ways. And defense, special teams helped in the first half. In the second half, the Sooners found a couple of drives where it finally gelled together. The Sooners know that they got to get a lot better if they're to stay in the national championship playoff race. Sooners, 11 a.m. Coming up on October 18th against K-State. And we'll see how the Sooners fare in the second half. Hopefully, from an execution standpoint, better than what we've seen. Winning beats losing. Sooners get out of Dallas with a W, 31-26. Boomer Sooner.